Hi guys, and welcome to my review of the new Fujifilm X-H1. My name is Kjetil Madsen, and if you haven't been to my channel before, be sure to check out my previous videos. This review will be geared more to the video side of the X-H1. We're looking at the new features, specs, a lot of sample footage including f-log, picture profiles and frame rates and so on. We will also have a look at some files in Final Cut Pro. I'm in no way sponsored or paid to say anything, and all my thoughts are my own personal meaning. I bought this camera at full price for my own personal use. I first reached out to Fujifilm Nordic and they offered to lend me one for this review, but as I bought one before they sent it, I used my own personal camera for this test. Okay, so let's move on. First, some sample shots graded to my own personal taste, all shot with the X-H1. Okay, I hope you enjoyed that, guys. Now let's have a closer look at the X-H1. First up, this camera is not the predecessor of the X-T2. This camera is the new top model in the X series. It will run in a separate line besides and above the X-T2. The X-H is more a hybrid camera for both stills and video. The X-T2 is more geared to photography than video, even though it makes some great video files. The X-H1 still incorporates the highly praised 24.3mm APS-C sensor that we know from the X-T2, and then we know the image quality will be good. In video mode there is no crop in Full HD, but we have the same small 1.17 crop in 4K recording. The magnesium alloy body is weather sealed, but remember to put a weather sealed lens on if you're going into the rain, or it won't do any good. The weight is 673 grams, including battery and memory cards, compared to the X-T2's 570 grams, so about 170 grams difference. It shoots up to 11 frames per second in mechanical shutter or 14 frames per second with electronic shutter. This is with the grip attached. It uses the same NPW126S battery. The non-S battery can be used, but it's not recommended. You will get a warning in the camera if using a non-S battery. Okay, so what's new? First off, you can straight away see that the camera is quite different from the X-T2. It is more of the child of the X-T2 and the medium format GFX camera. The top LCD panel is known from the GFX, and the grip is significantly larger than on the X-T2. And I can tell you straight away, the grip and the comfort of this camera is like nothing else I've ever owned or tried out for that matter. The grip is really deep and feels like molded after my hand. The extra big knob on the back also gives a good rest for your thumb. So straight off, a big score on the comfort of this camera. Next off, we have to mention the 5-axis IBIS. This is the first Fujifilm camera incorporating IBIS in the camera body. This in no way eliminates the needs of a tripod, slider or gimbal, but it will give you the possibility to handhold rather stationary or some slow motion handheld B-roll shots. We will talk more on the IBIS later in this review. Okay, so what I was really missing on the X-T2 was internal F-log recording. On the X-T2 it was only accessible via the HDMI output and only in 4K resolution. Now it's possible to record directly to the SD card and also in all the different resolutions and frame rates. We will have a look at some more F-log footage later. So I mentioned frame rates. I was really hoping for 4K in 60p in this camera, but we didn't get that. But we got 120p in Full HD recording, and as a bonus I can now also record in 4K DCI, which is a 17:9 aspect ratio. The recording bitrate had also been beefed up from 100 megabit per second on the X-T2 to 200 megabit per second on the X-H1. This should give a better image quality, even though its output is still 8-bit 420 directed to the card or 8-bit 422 on the HDMI output. Be aware that the image files will have double the size from 100 to 200 megabits per second, so get some high capacity cards. We now got face detection in video in 4K that the X-T2 only had in Full HD. There is also some clever coding in the X-T2 regarding how it pulls focus. Really cinematic. We will look at some samples and the possible settings later on. A major new feature, especially if you use a follow focus, is that you can choose from non-linear or linear focusing. If set to linear focusing, the speed that you turn the ring will not impact on the points you set the lens to. So if going back and forth between 2 points, you will end up in the same focus spot every time. This is something I have never seen in a mirrorless camera with focus by wire before, so thumbs up Fuji. This is a great feature, especially if you use a follow focus. We now get the tally light both in front and in the back that is fully customizable. This gives you also, if you are in front of the camera, the possibility to see if the recording is running. Great new feature, especially if you're a vlogger. And we now have shutter speeds available that corresponds to the 180 degrees shutter angle. You now have 148, 196, 120 and 1240. This have never been accessible before from Fujifilm. I really like this new feature a lot, so we can exactly double your frame rate for a pleasing motion blur. New to the X-H1 is also the new film simulation mode, Eterna. This is a film simulation with low saturation and soft shadows, giving you a very cinematic and easy gradable look. I really enjoy the look and gradability of this film simulation. The dynamic range of Eterna color profile is about 12 stops. Eterna is actually not a new name from Fujifilm, as this was also the name of a motion picture film from Fujifilm. The film was not available to consumers back in the film days, and only a handful of users have had an experience with this motion film. The X-H1 also features a touchscreen, both for menus and focus. The 3-inch screen is still the same as on the X-T2, and I really think it needs an update. There is room for a bigger screen, and the sharpness is not that good, so it's not good enough to pull focus without using peeking or zooming in. So I often use a small HD focus screen to help me check the focusing. There are no zebras or waveforms, etc., but you have a histogram and highlight alerts available. The screen is possible to flip upwards, but beware that the protruding eyepiece will cover some of the shot if looking straight down. You can also flip the screen partially downwards, and if shooting low in portrait orientation, you can flip it sideways. So let's have a look at some test shots with the X-H1. First we have the Eterna picture profile in 4K. Shadows and highlights are turned back to -2. Also the sharpening is at -4. First we see an example at 200 megabit per second. Then we have the same settings, but turn the bitrate back to 100 megabit per second. Then the same at 50 megabit per second. Here are the 3 bitrates together with a small shadow and highlights adjustments. For the static scene, I think they all held up very well. If you had more movements and I started grading the shots more, the lower bitrates would probably fall behind more in picture quality. Then there's the DCI 4K with its wider aspect ratio and higher resolution. It's been downsampled to a standard 4K timeline in this case. Next is the Full HD upscale to 4K to fit my project. I know it's not optimal, but it's the only way to showcase this in the same video for you guys. Then over to the Full HD slow motion. Here at 120p at 5 times slower on this 24 frames per second timeline. Notice the moiré on the vehicles and some of the top of the building. This is actually one of my disappointments regarding picture quality. The moiré and jaggis in 120p, especially if the camera or objects are moving, is pretty high. Some shots are rendered not usable in my standard. Here is one example in harsh sunlight with the brick walls and power lines. It looks like the whole picture is alive and moving within the frame. One more example where moiré and color moiré is pretty bad. Here one more. The ground is literally alive. Even though the bitrate is as high as in 4K at 200 megabit per second, the amount of data available for each individual frame is less. Remember, there is 120 frames sharing the 200 megabit. When played back 5 times slower, the megabit per second is more like 40 megabit per second. Unfortunately, I don't see Fujifilm doing anything about this, as this probably is a codec thing. But we can cross fingers that it will get better in a firmware update. Until then, shooting with wider apertures and avoid fine texture objects. I was really hoping for less moiré in the 120p setting on this camera. The X-T2 performed better regarding moiré at 60p and 100 megabits per second, resulting in a similar playback bitrate at 24 frames per second. But the 60p in X-H1 looks fine, so it's like the X-T2. Here we see 100 frames per second, and I can see similar problems here, unfortunately. Look at the details on the moving vehicles. I know these scenes are not what you typically shoot at 100 or 120 frames per second, but I just want to inform you guys what to expect. Here is F-log, exposed one stop over the light meter reading. Remember that the ISO is at 800 at its lowest when you select F-log. You probably need to have a strong ND or a closed aperture sum to remain a decent shutter speed in bright daylight. So let's apply the F-log LUT from Fujifilm. So we convert it to Rec 709. The look is instantly quite similar to the Eterna color profile. Here is an example of F-log exposed according to the camera's average light meter. You could run into problems with noise in the darker areas if you don't push the highlights almost at 100 IRE. Let's bring the log file and the Eterna file into Final Cut Pro. F-log to the left and Eterna to the right. We can clearly see a difference in the contrast between the darkest and brightest part of the waveform. The Eterna file has clipped the highlights in the puddles on the road, and they cannot be brought back if pulling the highlights down. In the log file we have all the highlights information present. We could play around with the grading or maybe put a crater LUT, but still the image is rubbish as the contrast midday directly against the sun is never going to look any good. I chose this scene to give the camera some dynamic range problems in this specific test. Let's quickly look through all the available picture profiles. The result would be similar if you use them on photos. First we have Provia, Velvia, Astia, Classic Chrome, Proneg High, Proneg Standard, Eterna, Acros, Monochrome, and lastly Sephia. For me personally, only the Eterna and the Proneg standards are the ones usable for high contrast scenes. On the X-T2 I always use Proneg standard with sharpening, highlights and shadow to the lowest settings. So we have the possibility of 3 DR dynamic range settings. First the DR100, then DR200, and lastly DR400. Remember that DR200 is minimum ISO 400 and DR400 is minimum ISO 800. We can see that the highlights in the puddle in the street has more information in the higher DR settings. If we open the files in Final Cut Pro, we can see that the highlight information has been lost in the DR100 settings. On DR200 we have the highlight information still intact, and in DR400 the contrast is even less. So in situations like this, the DR could be of help. Lowering the exposure on the DR100 could have saved the highlights, but pushing up the shadows could bring in some noise. So how big impact does the shadow, highlights and sharpening adjustments make? Here it's all at the maximum negative settings. And here it's the maximum positive settings. Quite a big difference. If your goal is to post-process the files, I recommend the lowest settings and add contrast and sharpening in post. Some basics of the layout. As we know from previous Fujifilm cameras, we have a lot of buttons and dials, easy accessible and in a good layout. We have the ISO dial with the drive dial underneath. New to the X-H1 is the continuous medium selection that is customizable. This is good as you often don't need to hammer 14 pictures every second. We have the shutter speed settings with the metering dial. A tip to speed up the shutter speed settings when changing from stills to video mode is to use the T settings. You can then use the rear command dial to change the shutter speeds. This is great especially if you often jump from normal slow motion video. You can easily change it, let's say 148 to 1240. Then all the way to the right we are now missing a button that we previously had on the XT series, the exposure compensation dial. Now the exposure compensation is done with pressing the new button and using the command dial. You can customize how the button works, so I have configured it. So I press the button once, then adjust with the rear dial and then press again to lock the compensation. For me this works best. But instead we have this lovely 1.28 inch LCD screen. This is highly customizable and will display different depending on if you are in video or stills mode. It even displays when turned off like shown here. In video mode it's the remaining record time, and in photo mode it displays the remaining shots including battery level. The background color, black or white, for the display can be selected with this button. You will love this if you shoot a lot in the dark. I know I missed this when shooting concerts with the XT models. There are 2 SD card slots, both compatible with UHS 2 cards. I will leave a link to recommended cards from Fujifilm in the video description. They recommend rather fast cards. I have a 300 megabyte per second card, but technically shooting video with the card with 25 megabytes minimum should technically be sufficient. Remember the maximum bitrate is 200 megabit, not megabyte. There is 8 bits in 1 byte. So megabits has a lowercase b in the name and bytes have an uppercase b in the name. Okay, let's move on. The opening button on the side tilt on the screen now has an improved button. This opens so much easier than the cumbersome button on the X-T2. Thumbs up for improving Fuji. There is also a provided cable protector. This won't prevent the cables from being jagged straight out of the camera, but if pulled sideways, you won't break the connectors or pins in the camera. The focus is noticeably more snappy in photo mode than on the X-T2. and the cinematic focus pulse in AFC in video is much more pleasing than on the X-T2. The IBIS, the in-body image stabilizer, is one of the reasons this camera is slightly larger than the X-T2. The sensor needs to be able to move quite a bit. It can stabilize up to 5.5 stops depending on the lenses you use. Prime lenses have the highest stabilizing possibilities, as these more often have a bigger image circle, allowing the sensor to move a further distance. If using adapted lenses like my Mitacon 35mm, you get 3-axis stabilization. The lens does not give any distance information to the camera, that's why there is only 3 axes. But still it works great. I can now shoot handheld video with lenses like this. So now the question many ask, should you leave IBIS on or off if you're on the gimbal? Let's do a short test. Here I'm in a narrow alley, so we can better see the Z-axis movement you get when walking, and in the end we have some stairs I have to climb. First IBIS on, walking the ninja walk as best as I can. Then I tried to recreate the best as I could without the IBIS. Then let's look at them side by side. There is definitely a reduction of the up and down movement and some side to side movement you get when on a gimbal. I have the IBIS on every time I have been on a gimbal, and I have had no negative effects so far. So my recommendation is, like Fuji says, leave it on when on a gimbal, turn it off when on a tripod. There is a 0.5-inch 3.7 million dots OLED color viewfinder, and all I can say, it's great. Really sharp, bright and big, and if you still think optical viewfinders are superior, please test this viewfinder. The internal microphone is said to be a high quality 24-bit 48 kHz microphone. I just admit, even though it might be good, it's like most internal microphones, prone to easily pick up wind noise. Also, if very quiet surroundings, you will hear the IBIS. The IBIS makes a humming noise even when on or off, so you are warned. I recommend an external microphone, as I would for any camera. So, regarding focus, we have the possibility to adjust the tracking sensitivity, which is how long the camera locks on to the focus if something comes in between you and the subject. Like if there's a person passing in between you and the subject, if set to fast, it will try to focus on the person passing by. If set to locked, it will ignore the object for some time and keep your subject in focus. You have to decide depending on what you shoot. If you are shifting focus between objects, you need to set this to fast. Then there is the AF speed, adjusting how fast it will move between the subject you want to focus on. Let's look at 2 examples. First, we set it to the fastest settings. The light is pretty low and I hit the low contrast area, so it struggles some here. Then we select the slowest settings. You can see how it looks more like a person pulling focus here. I like the possibility to customize this. It's great. Then we have an example with the fastest focus speed selected. You can see it shifts quite nice and fast to the close, medium and far subject. And please ignore the camera shake, as I managed to turn off IBIS in this case. But then we have a point where I have found a possible problem. Sometimes when focusing first on the close, then on a distant subject, it refuses to catch focus again on a close subject. Here you will see it will not focus back again when moving back to the close subject. One more example. No matter how long I wait, it will not shift back. The focus just refuses to focus anymore. Sometimes I stop the recording and start again, then it could work just fine. I've been in contact with Fujifilm Nordic and I'm waiting for the final statement regarding this problem. I'll inform you guys later on when I have more information, but I see no reason than Fujifilm just fixing this bug. Fujifilm Nordic also confirmed what I've been said in other reviews, that the focus can be less effective when raising the DR settings because of the higher ISO and less contrast. The DR was at 100% when I have experienced my problem, so it was not this in this case. I will keep you guys updated when I have more information and a final answer from Fujifilm Nordic. So, moving on to other stuff it does well. A truck moving straight at me at 140mm. Please ignore the shaking, I had a hard time trying to keep him in the frame as he was moving quite fast. As you can see, no problem keeping him in focus. Here in slow motion you see his hand and the steering wheel perfectly in focus. Moving on to an example where we set the AF speed to the slowest setting. You see it moves focus really cinematic. I find the speed is great normally from 0 to -3 in normal situations with no fast moving objects. With action stuff, choose somewhere from +2 to +5. Depends how snappy you want the focus to be. Two examples from Full HD 60p, playback in 24p. Focus was set to multi, so it focused on the closest subject. To me it looks really good when it shifts from the close fence and wall and over to the building behind it. Except from the obvious focus bug that I mentioned, that I expect Fujifilm to fix, I really enjoy the autofocus on the X-H1. Video menu. We will run through the 4 pages with the available video adjustments. At the top we have the movie mode adjustments. If you're going in to the menu, we can choose all the available resolutions, then the frame rate, and at last the bitrate, up to 200 megabit per second in 4K selections. There are sound recordings in all these options. Then we have the Full HD high-speed recording menu, where we have the option of 2 times to 5 times slow motion, up to 120p. Please note that there is no sound recording in any slow motion recordings, and you really don't need that grungy slow motion sound anyway. We can select the film simulation, dynamic range for movie, white balance for movie, highlight tone for movie, shadow tone for movie, color saturation for movie, sharpness for movie, noise reduction for movie, F-log on or off, peripheral light correction for movie, so technically speaking vignette reduction, pre-select the focus area, movie AF mode, you can choose between multi or area. Then we have the AFC custom settings for movie like we spoke about earlier. Select the pre-AF is on or off. If set on, the camera focuses constantly even when not recording or half pressing the shutter button. Face detection on or off. Select how we want to display your manual focus aids. Focus check on or off. That's the small green icon showing if you're in focus or not. HDMI output info display. This will let your external monitor show a duplicate of the rear screen with menus, focus points, etc., or just a clean picture. Then there is the option how the 4K and Full HD signal will be output to the HDMI and written to the card. The settings here depend on if you are using an external recorder and its resolution capabilities. I record the maximum resolution to the card and only a Full HD to my monitor, as it doesn't need a 4K in. HDMI standby quality, choose 4K or Full HD. HDMI record control on or off. If enabled, the camera sends a start and stop signal to the HDMI device when the shutter button is operated. Audio settings, both for internal and external mic, including mic level limiter, wind filter, low cut filter and headphone volume. Timecode settings. This is new for the X-H1 and great if you need this for your editing. Tally light configuration. You can configure both the front and rear tally light to on, off, constant lighting or flashing. And lastly, enable or disable the silent control for the rear screen. If on, this will disable all the hard buttons on the camera for shutter, ISO, aperture, etc. and you can select them directly on the screen. You can select directly on the touchscreen or use the joystick to move around in the menu. So let's sum up this review. Why did I choose the X-H1 when there are so many other options out there in the same price range? I must admit that I also was looking at Sony a7R III, a7 III and also the GH5 and GH5S before I made my decision. I was shooting 2 systems prior to buying the X-H1 I use Nikon D800 with all the high-end zooms and the X-T2 with a lot of primes. I wanted something that could meet my need both in photo and video in the same system, and I was tired of all the big Nikon body and glass. I was almost never using it anymore. The Panasonic, except for the somewhat unreliable focus, is the obvious choice if you are only into video. It shoots 10-bit 42 to the card. That should result in much more headroom in post-production. But after testing it very shortly, it didn't give me the same feeling as I have with the Fuji system. And I wouldn't shoot any motorsports with the GH5, as I also do some photos. The Sony, I immediately felt the frustration with the menu system, remembering some previous Sony compact cameras that I've owned in the past. The Sony body feels so small when you put that oversized glass on it. So I bit the bullet, sold my Nikon gear, and now I'm shooting only Fujifilm with the X-T2 and X-H1. So, the negative points. You have the moiré in 120p. You have some focus issues in AFC in video mode that I'm sure they will fix in the firmware. Somewhat big camera with the grip in mirrorless standard, but it handles beautifully. And without the grip, I think it's a good size. There is no 4K 60p. There is no 10-bit recording. And maybe it's time to Fujifilm to update the rear screen. It's been around for some time now. Then the positive points. The grip and controls feels really nice. It's a weather seal body, the informative top LCD that's highly customizable, and almost all buttons are customizable to whatever function you want. IBIS works great, making the camera useful when hand-holding video. Beautiful color profiles, especially the Eterna for video. F-log internal recording, adjustable cinematic focus pulse, high bitrate recording at 200 megabit per second. That's only in 4K and slow motion full HD. We got the new 4K DCI. There's high dynamic range in video and photos, and great photos both in RAW and JPEGs. We have the double frame rate shutter speeds available, and we have the linear and non-linear focusing available. My final conclusion, it's a good hybrid camera. You need to decide yourself according to what system and lenses you already own. Do you only shoot video or only shoot stills? Do you really need a full frame camera? The X-H1 is a great performer, and I myself do not miss the full frame. The Fujifilm glass is like no other, and I have owned a lot of top Nikon glass before, like the 200 f2 for instance. The sharpness, wide open, contrast, colors are superb on the Fujifilm glass. Good small glass is important also when considering a system like the Fujifilm. The X-H1 is not perfect, no camera is, but I really dig the feeling this camera gives me. So, if you enjoyed this video, consider subscribing to my channel if you want to see more stuff like this. Tick the small bell and you'll get notified when new stuff is posted. Feel free to post any comments and I will try my best to answer them. Cheers from Norway guys, and see you in the next video.
Always on tonight. Throw that thing from left, right, side to side. Yeah. All my friends are here. Play my favorite song right on top. Yeah. And we never stop. Music bumping, we just keep on rolling. Yeah. No, we never stop. Shake, shake, shake your honey till the morning. Let me hear you say I'm ready. I'm ready. Come on, now slide, slide, slide to the bar. Shine, shine, shine like a star. Let me hear you say I'm ready.